What if the biggest winner on draft night wasn't the player whose name got called first, but the one everyone said had fallen the furthest? That's the question fans started asking the moment the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines began to spin. Because while analysts rushed to explain what went wrong, a completely different story was quietly unfolding behind the scenes, one that had nothing to do with draft position, contracts, or the usual rookie expectations. And the more people looked closer, the stranger it started to feel. For weeks, the conversation sounded simple. A highly talked about prospect drops lower than expected. The media calls it a reality check, and the league moves on. But this time, something didn't add up. Instead of looking defeated, the player at the center of the storm seemed calm, almost like he expected the chaos. Reports, reactions, and online debates exploded overnight, with some fans claiming this was a major setback, while others insisted it might actually be the beginning of a completely new kind of athlete, one who doesn't need the system to define success. Rumors quickly started spreading across social media. Some suggested the draft slide was a message from powerful voices within the league. Others argued it was simply a football decision being turned into drama for clicks. And then there were the more interesting theories, the ones claiming that the real money and influence had already been secured long before draft night ever arrived. Whether those claims are true or just fan speculation, one thing became impossible to ignore. The story wasn't ending when the draft closed, it was just starting. Because while millions of viewers focused on where he landed, a bigger question began to surface. What happens when a rookie walks into professional sports already financially secure, already famous, and already in control of his own narrative? The NFL has always relied on a certain power structure, one where players earn their place step by step, but this moment felt different. Almost like the rules were quietly changing in real time. And if that's true, then what happened that night might say less about one player and more about the future of the entire league. And here's where things get even more interesting. The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just about football talent or draft boards. It was about branding, perception, and who really controls the story when millions of fans are watching. Because while some people saw a fall, others saw a calculated move. While critics talked about missed millions, supporters pointed to something they believed was far more valuable: independence. And that clash of perspectives is exactly what turned this from a sports story into something much bigger. So before we get into the rumors, the business moves, and the tensions that followed, you need to understand what actually happened on that draft night and why so many people believe the moment everyone called a setback might have been the start of a new era. Because once you see how the pieces connect, the entire story looks very different than the one you first heard. No one expected the night to unfold the way it did. As the draft coverage began, analysts spoke with confidence, projecting where every major name would land and building a storyline that felt almost scripted. The expectation around Shedeur Sanders was clear, a player surrounded by hype, talent, and massive attention, expected by many to hear his name called early. Fans tuned in waiting for confirmation, ready to watch the next chapter begin exactly as predicted. But as the picks started rolling in, something strange happened. Teams passed, then more teams passed, and suddenly the conversation shifted from excitement to confusion. At first, people assumed it was just strategy. Draft boards are unpredictable, and surprises happen every year. But as the hours stretched on, the atmosphere changed. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from disbelief to outrage. Some fans insisted there had to be something happening behind the scenes. Others argued that it was simply the reality of scouting evaluations catching up with expectations. The cameras caught reactions, analysts scrambled to explain what they were seeing, and the narrative began forming in real time. A talented player slipping further than anyone anticipated, while the internet tried to figure out why. What made the moment feel different wasn't just the slide itself, it was how quickly the story became bigger than football. Headlines framed it as a humbling experience. Commentators debated whether confidence had been mistaken for arrogance. Rumors started circulating, with some suggesting teams were cautious about the spotlight that surrounded him, while others claimed it was purely about fit and timing. None of these theories were confirmed, but the speculation only fueled the chaos. Every pick that passed added another layer of tension, turning what should have been a celebration into a national conversation about perception, pressure, and control. And then came the most surprising part. While the media painted the moment as a dramatic fall, the reaction from Shedeur himself didn't match the script people expected. There was no visible panic, no frustration spilling into interviews, no signs of someone whose future had collapsed overnight. Instead, the calm response only made the debate louder. Was this confidence, preparation, or proof that the story unfolding on TV wasn't the one actually happening behind the scenes? Fans began to split into camps, those who saw a setback and those who believed something much bigger was unfolding. As the night moved forward, another layer emerged. The draft has always been about opportunity, but it's also about power. Teams decide who gets chosen, analysts define narratives, and players are expected to accept whatever role they're given. But this moment challenged that tradition. Some observers began questioning whether the old rules still applied to a new generation of athletes who arrive with established brands, financial backing, and direct access to millions of followers. The idea that a draft position could define a player's worth suddenly felt less certain than it used to. By the time the dust settled, the headlines were already written. Some called it a shocking drop, others called it a wake-up call. But for many fans watching closely, the real takeaway wasn't about where he was picked, it was about how differently he seemed to handle the moment compared to what the system expected. And that's when people started looking backward, asking a question that changed the direction of the entire conversation. Because if draft night didn't actually hurt him the way everyone assumed, then maybe the real story had begun long before his name was ever called. And what happened before that night would explain why the reactions felt so different and why some believe the draft wasn't the beginning of the story at all, but just the moment the rest of the world finally caught up. Long before the draft cameras ever turned on, the foundation for this story was already being built. While most college athletes spent their early years focused purely on making it to the next level, Shedeur Sanders was doing something different. Building a brand that existed far beyond the field. The rise of the NIL era changed everything, allowing college players to earn money, sign endorsements, and shape their own public image before becoming professionals. And for someone already living in the spotlight, that shift created an opportunity few previous generations ever had. From the outside, it looked like confidence, but behind that confidence was strategy. Endorsement deals, social media presence, and carefully managed visibility transformed him from just a promising quarterback into a recognizable figure well before the NFL entered the conversation. Fans weren't only following his highlights, they were following his lifestyle, his interviews, and the personality he presented directly to the public. That kind of visibility meant something important. His value wasn't tied entirely to where he would be drafted. Whether people agreed with it or not, the traditional path where a player waited for the league to validate him was already starting to fade. A lot of that understanding came from watching how fame and sports intersected around him growing up. Being close to a figure like Deion Sanders meant seeing firsthand how narratives are shaped and how quickly public opinion can shift. The lesson seemed clear: if you don't control the story, someone else will tell it for you. So instead of relying on traditional media coverage, he leaned into platforms where he could speak directly to fans. Videos, interviews, and posts created a sense of familiarity that made supporters feel connected long before he ever took a professional snap. This new level of independence didn't sit comfortably with everyone. Some analysts praised it as the future of sports, arguing that athletes should have the freedom to build wealth early and protect themselves from the uncertainty of pro careers. Others questioned whether too much fame too soon could distract from performance. And that tension became part of the narrative itself. Critics suggested that the attention around his brand overshadowed the football, while supporters argued the opposite, that smart branding was simply part of being a modern athlete. The debate wasn't really about one player anymore, it was about how the game itself was changing. What made this even more interesting was how financial stability altered perception. In previous eras, rookies entered the league desperate for their first big contract, making teams and executives the clear holders of power. But now, players arriving with endorsement income and huge followings appeared less dependent on immediate success. Some fans viewed this as freedom, others viewed this as a challenge to the old hierarchy. Rumors began circulating online that league insiders weren't sure how to handle athletes who already felt bigger than the system. Rumors that remain unverified but continued to fuel discussion across sports media. And that's why draft night felt so different to many viewers. The emotional script everyone expected, disappointment, desperation, urgency, never fully appeared. Instead, the reaction felt measured, almost detached from the chaos surrounding it. To some, that calm suggested preparation. To others, it hinted that the stakes weren't as high as the headlines claimed. Either way, it forced people to reconsider what success actually looked like in a world where brand power could rival on-field status. By the time the dust settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't a rookie stepping into fame for the first time. It was a public figure entering a league that traditionally preferred players to earn recognition slowly. And that shift raised a bigger question. If the draft no longer controls a player's financial future the way it once did, what happens when the system tries to humble someone who doesn't really need humbling? The answer starts to appear when you look at the conversation that exploded next, the debate over the so-called missing millions and whether losing money on paper actually meant losing anything at all. The moment the draft ended, a single number started dominating the conversation. The millions people claimed had vanished overnight. Analysts rushed to calculate how much money was supposedly left on the table based on where he was selected compared to earlier projections. Headlines framed it as a massive financial loss, a cautionary tale about expectations versus reality. To casual fans, it sounded straightforward: slide down the draft board, lose a fortune. But the deeper people looked, the more complicated the story became. The NFL rookie pay system is structured and predictable, which made the math easy for commentators to explain. Earlier picks come with larger signing bonuses, bigger guaranteed money, and long-term financial security from day one. On paper, dropping multiple rounds can mean tens of millions less over the life of a contract, and for most players, that difference changes everything. It affects lifestyle, leverage, and future negotiations. That's why the narrative spread so quickly. It felt like an obvious example of consequences unfolding in real time. But almost immediately, another perspective emerged. While critics focused on what was supposedly lost, supporters pointed to what already existed long before the draft. Endorsements, media reach, and established visibility created a different kind of safety net. Some fans argued that the number being repeated in headlines didn't fully represent reality, because not all financial value comes directly from a rookie deal anymore. Rumors circulating online suggested that brand partnerships and outside income could soften or even completely reshape the impact of a lower draft position. These claims remained speculative, but they gained traction because they challenged a decades-old assumption that draft position equals total worth. What made the story even more fascinating was the reaction itself. Instead of frustration or public disappointment, the response felt unusually calm. Interviews and public appearances carried a tone that surprised people expecting anger or regret. That disconnect only intensified the debate. Was it confidence hiding disappointment, or was it proof that the narrative of loss simply didn't match how the situation was being viewed internally? Fans began to read between the lines, with some interpreting the calm as a signal that the draft bonus wasn't the defining factor outsiders believed it to be. Social media amplified every angle. Clips circulated comparing rookie contracts to endorsement values, comment sections filled with arguments about whether modern athletes even need traditional pathways to wealth anymore. Some critics accused supporters of spinning the story to protect a brand image, while defenders insisted the media was exaggerating the missing millions for dramatic effect. Somewhere in the middle sat a truth few people wanted to admit. Both sides might have had a point. Yes, money on paper had changed, but so had the economics surrounding high-profile athletes entering the league. Then the conversation shifted again. Instead of focusing solely on dollars, people started asking why the financial narrative felt so aggressive in the first place. Was it just media hype, or was there a deeper fascination with seeing highly confident athletes brought back down to earth? Some online voices speculated that the story of losing millions fit too perfectly into an old sports storyline, the lesson that every player must be humbled before succeeding. Those interpretations remain opinions rather than facts, but they added another layer of intrigue that kept audiences hooked. And as debates about money continued, something unexpected happened. The discussion stopped being about contracts altogether and became about perception. The question turned from how much did he lose to did he actually lose anything that matters? For some fans, the answer was obvious. For others, it felt like rewriting reality. But either way, the tension kept growing, because the more people argued about finances, the clearer it became that the real battle wasn't about numbers, it was about who controlled the story being told. And that realization opened the door to an even bigger conflict, because once the conversation moved beyond money, attention shifted to something far more powerful, the media narrative itself, and whether the league or the player had the stronger voice in shaping what the world believed next. The moment the missing millions narrative took off, another battle quietly started unfolding, a battle over who actually gets to decide what the story means. For decades, sports media has played the role of storyteller, turning wins and losses into narratives that fans understand. But in this case, the traditional process didn't go smoothly. Every headline that framed the draft slide as a failure was immediately countered by clips, posts, and reactions coming directly from the players' own platforms. Instead of one version of the story dominating the conversation, two completely different realities seemed to exist at the same time. On one side were analysts and commentators following the familiar script. A high-profile prospect falls in the draft, expectations are reset, and the lesson becomes about humility. It's a storyline audiences have seen before, and it fits neatly into the league's long-established culture. But on the other side was something newer, direct communication between athlete and audience. Videos uploaded without network editing, interviews shared instantly online, and fans dissecting every detail in real time meant the old gatekeepers no longer had total control. The narrative wasn't being delivered from one stage anymore, it was being fought across thousands of screens simultaneously. This shift created tension that went far beyond one player. Supporters argued that athletes should be able to tell their own stories without needing approval from pundits who may not fully understand them. Critics pushed back, saying that controlling your own media can blur the line between authenticity and image management. The debate became less about football performance and more about credibility. Who should fans believe? The professionals analyzing from the outside, or the athletes speaking for themselves? And the more people argued, the more the story gained momentum. Rumors began circulating online that certain narratives were being pushed intentionally, with some fans speculating that the league prefers players who fit a predictable mold. These claims remain unverified, and there's no confirmed evidence of coordinated messaging, but the speculation itself became part of the story. Every time a harsh criticism surfaced on television, supporters pointed it as proof that independent athletes make established systems uncomfortable. Whether true or not, the perception spread quickly, creating a sense that this was about more than a draft position, it was about control. What made the situation even more fascinating was the speed of modern media cycles. Clips taken out of context went viral within hours, while reaction channels and podcasts built entire episodes around tiny moments. The line between reporting and entertainment blurred, and controversy became fuel for engagement. In that environment, the loudest narrative often wins, regardless of nuance. Fans weren't just consuming the story, they were actively shaping it, turning opinions into trending topics overnight. Meanwhile, the player at the center of it all seemed to lean into the chaos rather than run from it. Instead of disappearing or trying to avoid attention, the presence remained consistent and visible. That approach only added to the divide. Some viewers saw confidence and media savvy, others interpreted it as a calculated branding. Either way, it proved one thing: the traditional method of controlling perception through selective media access no longer worked the way it used to. As the weeks passed, the battle over narrative grew louder, but another element started pulling attention away from the headlines. Because while everyone argued about media framing, a new storyline was brewing inside the team itself. Whispers about competition, pressure, and internal uncertainty began circulating, shifting the focus from public perception to what was happening behind closed doors. And that's where the story took another turn, straight into one of the most unpredictable environments in the league. Walking into the NFL is difficult for any rookie, but stepping into a situation already filled with tension turns the challenge into something entirely different. The moment Shedeur Sanders became connected to Cleveland, the conversation shifted from draft night debates to the reality of surviving one of the most scrutinized environments in football. Fans were already divided, the media was searching for the next headline, and the quarterback room itself carried layers of uncertainty that had been building long before he arrived. Instead of a clean slate, he was entering a story already in progress. The biggest source of pressure came from the existing quarterback situation. A veteran with a massive contract still dominated discussion, even as questions about performance in long-term fit continued to surface. Analysts debated whether the team was truly committed to moving forward or simply stuck managing past decisions. For a rookie trying to establish himself, that creates a strange dynamic. Every practice rep, every interview, and every rumor instantly becomes part of a larger narrative about the future of the franchise. It wasn't just about proving talent, it was about surviving expectations that weren't entirely his own. Local media coverage intensified the atmosphere. Reports and commentary often framed the situation as a looming competition, even when coaches avoided confirming anything publicly. Some insiders suggested the organization wanted stability, while others believed change was inevitable. None of those whispers were officially confirmed, but the speculation was enough to keep fans endlessly debating what was happening behind the scenes. Every minor update felt amplified, turning ordinary off-season moments into headline material. The pressure wasn't only coming from within the building, it was coming from millions of eyes watching for signs of conflict. What made things even more complicated was the emotional weight surrounding the franchise itself. Cleveland fans have seen highs and lows over the years, and hope often arrives with a layer of skepticism. That energy creates both opportunity and risk for a young quarterback. Supporters desperate for a new beginning can rally quickly, but expectations can also become overwhelming if early performances don't match the hype. In this environment, patience tends to disappear fast, and narratives shift week to week depending on results. Rumors about internal uncertainty only added fuel to the fire. Reports claimed the coaching staff faced mounting pressure to deliver results immediately, while online speculation suggested differing opinions on how quickly the team should transition toward a younger future. These claims remain unverified, but they reflected a broader truth. Organizations under scrutiny rarely operate calmly. For a rookie, that means learning not just the playbook, but also how to navigate politics, public opinion, and constantly shifting expectations. And yet, amid the noise, something interesting started happening. Instead of shrinking from the spotlight, the attention seemed to intensify curiosity around him. Fans began comparing body language, interviews, and preseason moments, searching for clues about confidence and leadership. Some believed the chaos could accelerate growth, forcing a young player to mature faster than normal. Others warned that pressure like this has derailed promising careers before. Either way, the environment itself became part of the story, almost as important as anything happening on the field. The deeper questions started to emerge.
Was this pressure cooker a trap or a launch pad? If the veteran narrative continued to dominate, the rookie could remain stuck in the background. But if performances or circumstances shifted, the sane chaos could create an opening faster than anyone
expected. That uncertainty kept fans and analysts locked in, waiting for the moment when the balance might tip one way or the other. And as the debate continued, a bigger realization started creeping into the conversation. This wasn't just about one team's quarterback dilemma. It was about how the entire league might be changing. Because if players entering the NFL already have brand power and financial stability, the old model of rookies quietly waiting their turn may not survive much longer. And that idea led directly to the next question everyone was suddenly asking. Are we witnessing the end of the humble rookie era? For decades, the unwritten rule for rookies entering professional sports was simple. Keep your head down, prove yourself quietly, and wait your turn. The league rewarded patience, humility, and obedience to the system. Confidence was acceptable, but only after success came first. But lately, that tradition has started to feel less certain. The arrival of athletes who already have massive followings, endorsement deals, and financial security before they ever play a professional snap is forcing fans and insiders to ask a question that used to sound impossible. Is the era of the humble rookie coming to an end? The shift didn't happen overnight. The rise of NIL opportunities in college sports changed the starting point for many athletes, allowing them to build wealth and public recognition years earlier than previous generations. Instead of arriving as unknown prospects desperate for validation, some players now step into the league with established brands and loyal audiences already behind them. That changes the dynamic immediately. When a rookie isn't entirely dependent on a first contract to secure their future, the balance of power subtly begins to move. This new reality makes some traditionalists uncomfortable. Critics argue that players who arrive with big personalities and strong personal brands risk putting image ahead of performance. They believe the league's culture was built on earning respect slowly, not walking in with it already assumed. Supporters see it differently. To them, this evolution represents athletes finally taking control of their careers and protecting themselves in a system that historically held most of the leverage. Neither side fully agrees, which is exactly why the debate has become so intense. What makes this moment particularly interesting is perception. Confidence that might once have been praised as leadership can now be interpreted as arrogance, depending on who's watching. Fans are split between admiration for self-belief and skepticism toward anything that looks too polished or intentional. Social media magnifies that divide, turning every interview clip or public appearance into evidence for one side or the other. The result is a constant tug-of-war over how modern athletes should behave. Humble and quiet, or bold and self-directed. Some analysts have suggested that leagues may need to adapt faster than expected. If more players enter professional sports already financially secure, the traditional methods of control, contracts, media access, and public narratives may carry less influence than before. Rumors online claim that certain executives worry about this shift, though these discussions remain speculative and largely behind closed doors. Still, the idea itself resonates with fans who feel they are witnessing a transition happening in real time. At the same time, there's a cautionary side to the story. Fame and financial success before proving yourself at the highest level can create enormous pressure. Expectations rise quickly, and critics become less forgiving when early struggles appear. The same confidence that attracts supporters can also invite scrutiny. For every athlete who successfully balances branding with performance are examples of others who struggled under the weight of attention. That uncertainty keeps the conversation alive. Is this empowerment or a risky experiment playing out on the biggest stage? And that's what makes this moment feel bigger than any single player or team. It represents a cultural shift in how athletes view their careers from day one. The rookie who quietly waits in the background may be replaced by a new archetype, one who sees themselves as a brand, a media presence, and a business from the very beginning. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on perspective, but one thing is clear: the old expectations no longer feel guaranteed. As this new era begins to take shape, another question starts looming in the background. If the rules of success are changing, what happens next for the players leading that shift? Because the story doesn't end with debates about attitude or culture, it moves into something even more unpredictable. The future itself becomes the biggest mystery, and what happens next could determine whether this movement reshapes the league or proves the old system was stronger than anyone realized. Now the conversation moves into the most unpredictable part of the story. What happens next? The draft debates, the media narratives, and the questions about changing power dynamics have all built toward this moment where speculation takes over. Because no one truly knows how the next chapter will unfold. Some fans believe this is the beginning of a career that could redefine what success looks like in professional football. Others argue the real test hasn't even started yet, and that the spotlight only grows harsher once the games begin. Either way, the uncertainty is exactly what keeps everyone watching. Rumors have already started circulating about what the future could look like. Some reports claim that major brand opportunities may continue expanding regardless of on-field results, suggesting that influence and visibility might keep growing even before a starting role is secured. These claims remain unverified, but they reflect a broader shift in how modern athletes operate, blending sports performance with business strategy in ways that didn't exist a generation ago. If those rumors hold even a little truth, it could signal a future where players build parallel careers that don't rely entirely on team decisions. At the same time, skeptics warn that hype can disappear quickly if results don't match expectations. The NFL has a way of leveling narratives faster than any other league, and fans have seen rising stars stumble when the pressure becomes real. The next season will likely answer questions that social media can't. Can confidence translate into leadership in a demanding locker room? Can branding coexist with the grind required to succeed at the highest level? And perhaps most importantly, will performance silence critics or fuel even louder debates? Another possibility being discussed by fans is how teams might respond if this model proves successful. If a player enters the league already carrying massive attention and financial independence, organizations could be forced to rethink how they manage young talent. Some believe this could encourage franchises to embrace personality-driven stars, while others predict resistance from traditional voices who prefer established structures. None of this is certain, but the speculation itself highlights how much the landscape may be shifting beneath the surface. There's also the broader question of influence. If players can reach fans directly and shape their own narratives, the balance between league, media, and athlete may continue to evolve. The success or failure of this next chapter could become a case study for future prospects deciding how to approach their careers. Younger athletes are watching closely, not just for football outcomes, but for proof that independence can work at the highest level. And if it does, the ripple effects could extend far beyond one franchise or one season. But for now, everything sits on the edge of possibility. The excitement, the criticism, the rumors, all of it points to a future that hasn't been written yet. One strong performance could change the conversation overnight, just as quickly as one setback could revive old narratives. That unpredictability is what makes this moment so compelling. It isn't a finished story, it's a turning point where multiple futures seem equally possible. And that leads to the biggest question of all. Was the draft night shock actually the beginning of something larger? Or will it eventually be remembered as a brief moment of hype that faded once reality set in? The answer will depend on what happens next, and everyone watching seems to sense that the stakes are bigger than one player's career. Because if this experiment works, it could signal a future where athletes enter professional sports already in control of their destiny. And if it doesn't, the old system will claim proof that its rules still matter most. Either way, the next chapter won't just decide one career path, it might reveal where the entire league is heading. When you step back and look at everything that has unfolded, the story stops feeling like a simple discussion about draft position or contracts. It becomes something bigger, a collision between old expectations and a new generation of athletes who see the game differently. On one side is the traditional system, built on patience, hierarchy, and earning recognition step by step. On the other side is a growing movement where players arrive already visible, already influential, and already capable of shaping their own narrative before the league ever gets the chance. And right at the center of that clash sits a story that fans can't seem to stop debating. The draft night shock sparked the conversation, but it was everything that followed that kept it alive. The discussions about missing millions, the arguments over media framing, and the pressure-filled situation waiting in Cleveland all pointed to the same underlying question. Who really holds the power now? Is it still the teams and executives deciding how a player's story should unfold? Or has the balance started shifting toward athletes who no longer rely solely on traditional pathways to success? The answer isn't clear yet, and that uncertainty is exactly why the conversation keeps growing. What makes this moment so fascinating is how differently people interpret the same events. Some see confidence and preparation, proof that the game is evolving and players are learning to control their futures earlier than ever before. Others see risk, believing that real validation can only come through performance once the lights are brightest. Both perspectives carry weight, and neither side has fully won the argument. That tension creates a story with no easy ending, only more questions waiting to be answered. And maybe that's the real point. This isn't just about whether one player succeeds or fails. It's about whether the rules of professional sports are quietly changing right in front of us. If athletes can build wealth, influence, and loyal audiences before reaching the league, then the meaning of a draft slide, a contract, or even media criticism may never be the same again. The system that once shaped careers from day one might be facing a future where its control isn't as absolute as it used to be. As the season approaches, every snap, every interview, and every headline will add new pieces to the puzzle. Supporters will look for proof that independence and branding can coexist with elite performance. Critics will wait for signs that the old lessons still apply. And somewhere between those two viewpoints lies the truth, a story still being written in real time, with millions watching to see which direction it turns next. So the real question isn't whether the draft night moment was a victory or a setback. The real question is what it represents moving forward. Did the league underestimate a new kind of player, or are we watching a wave of hype that reality will eventually bring back to earth? Because if this truly is the beginning of a new era, then what happened wasn't just a headline, it was a warning that the balance of power in football may already be changing, and the next chapter will decide everything.